This is your English listening practice podcast to help you learn and improve naturally. Hi there, and welcome to this episode of our podcast. Today we're diving into a challenge that so many English learners face. I can understand English, but I can't speak it. Does that sound familiar? You're not alone. This is one of the most common struggles for learners, and it can feel so frustrating. You might understand movies, podcasts, or even conversations, but when it's your turn to speak, the words just don't come out. But don't worry, we're here to help. In this episode, we'll explore why this happens and share practical tips to build your speaking confidence step by step. And I'm not doing this alone today. Let me introduce my friend who's joining me for this conversation.
Hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Like many of you, I've been there. I used to understand English pretty well. I could watch shows without subtitles and follow conversations, but when it came to speaking, I froze. My mind went blank and I felt so nervous. But over time, I found ways to overcome the struggle, and now I feel much more confident speaking in English. I can't wait to share my story and the techniques that worked for me. Hopefully they'll help you too.
So whether you're just starting to build your speaking skills, or you've been stuck for a while, this episode is for you. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into this topic together. Before we talk about solutions, let's start by understanding the problem. Why is it that you can understand English but struggle to speak it? Well, it's actually more common than you might think. When you listen to English, whether it's a podcast, a movie, or a conversation, you're using your passive skills. These are the skills that help you absorb information. But speaking, that's an active skill. It requires you to produce the language, and that can feel like a completely different challenge. Exactly.
For me, it felt like I had all these English words floating around in my brain. But when I tried to speak, it was like they were stuck in a box I couldn't open. I understood everything people said to me, but I couldn't respond. It was so frustrating.
And that frustration can make the problem even worse. You might start to avoid speaking altogether because it feels uncomfortable or embarrassing. But here's the thing. This gap between understanding and speaking is totally normal. Think about it this way. When you first learned to ride a bike, you had to practice balancing, pedaling, and steering all at the same time. Speaking English works the same way. It's a skill that takes time and practice.
And the good news is, if you can understand English, you already have a strong foundation. Speaking is just the next step. And it's something you can absolutely improve with the right approach.
Now that we've identified the problem, let's talk about one of the biggest barriers to speaking. Fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of being judged, or even fear of not knowing what to say. It's something almost every language learner deals with.
Oh, I've been there. I used to overthink everything before speaking. I'd be like, what if I say the wrong word? What if they laugh at me? And honestly, most of the time, I'd end up saying nothing at all.
And that's such a common experience. But here's the truth. Making mistakes is a natural part of learning. Nobody expects perfection and those little errors. They're actually opportunities to learn and get better. Think about kids learning to speak their first language. They make mistakes all the time, mixing up words, mispronouncing things. But they keep trying because they're not afraid of failing.
Exactly. And you know what helped me? Realizing that most people don't even notice your mistakes, or if they do, they don't care. If anything, they respect that you're making the effort to speak another language. Once I stopped worrying so much about being perfect, I started to improve so much faster.
So, one of the first steps to speaking confidently is changing your mindset. Instead of aiming for perfection, aim for progress. Focus on communicating your ideas, even if it's not 100% perfect. And remember, the more you practice, the more natural it will feel.
For me, I started small. I'd practice saying simple sentences out loud even when I was alone. Like, I'm gonna make some coffee, or it's a beautiful day today. Little by little, those small practices helped me feel more confident when talking to others.
That's a great tip. Building confidence is a gradual process. But every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. Now that we've talked about overcoming fear, let's focus on how to actually build your speaking skills. The key is to start small and stay consistent. You don't have to speak perfectly, or hold long conversations right away. Just like learning any skill, it's all about taking one step at a time.
That's so true. I used to think I needed to jump straight into full conversations, and it felt overwhelming. But then I realized I could start with something as simple as repeating short phrases or sentences I heard in podcasts or shows. It made practicing feel much easier.
Exactly. One great technique for starting small is called shadowing. It's when you listen to a short sentence in English and then repeat it out loud, trying to match the speaker's tone, speed, and pronunciation. You don't have to understand every word at first. Just focus on mimicking the sounds. It's a fantastic way to get used to forming English sentences.
I love shadowing. I used to do it with my favorite TV shows. I'd pause after a character spoke and repeat what they said. At first, it felt a little awkward, but over time, I noticed my pronunciation and rhythm improving a lot.
Another tip is to practice speaking about everyday activities, even if you're just talking to yourself. For example, describe what you're doing while making breakfast or getting ready for the day. You could say things like, "I'm brushing my teeth," or "I'm going to wear my favorite sweater today." These small practices help you get comfortable forming sentences without pressure.
And it doesn't have to be perfect. When I started doing this, I'd mix up tenses or forget words, but I kept going. The more I practiced, the more natural it felt. And eventually, I started using those sentences in real conversations.
That's the beauty of starting small. It builds your confidence over time. So, don't be afraid to practice, even if it feels a little awkward at first. One of the most powerful ways to improve your speaking is by immersing yourself in English through listening. The more you listen to natural conversations, podcasts, or shows, the more familiar you'll become with how words and phrases are used in context. It's like filling your brain with building blocks that you can use when speaking.
For me, listening to podcasts was a game changer. I'd hear real, everyday conversations and pick up on how people naturally express themselves. Even when I wasn't speaking, I felt like I was training my brain to think in English.
Exactly. Listening helps you absorb not just vocabulary, but also pronunciation, tone, and even cultural nuances. For example, you'll notice how native speakers use contractions like "I'm" instead of "I am," or how they emphasize certain words for effect. These details are so important when it comes to speaking naturally.
What helped me was focusing on specific phrases or expressions I heard repeatedly. For instance, I'd notice someone saying, "How's it going?" instead of "How are you?" I'd write it down and practice saying it myself. Over time, those phrases became part of my vocabulary.
That's a great idea. Another tip is to actively listen while imagining yourself in the situation. For example, if you're listening to a conversation about ordering coffee, picture yourself at the cafe. What would you say in that moment? This kind of active listening helps bridge the gap between understanding and speaking.
Yes, I started doing that too. I'd listen to dialogues and think, what would I say if I were in this situation? It made me feel more prepared when similar situations happened in real life.
So whether you're listening to podcasts, watching shows, or even practicing with our videos, remember to stay engaged. Pay attention to how people speak, and think about how you can use those phrases yourself. Now that we've talked about listening, let's focus on speaking. A lot of learners think they need a partner to practice. But the truth is, there are so many ways to create opportunities to speak, even if you're practicing on your own. True.
When I started, I didn't have anyone to practice with, so I found creative ways to get myself talking. One of the easiest things I did was talk to myself. I'd describe my day, plan out loud what I was going to do, or even pretend I was having a conversation. And that's such a great strategy.
Talking to yourself might feel a little strange at first, but it's a fantastic way to practice forming sentences and getting comfortable speaking out loud. For example, you could say, "I'm going to cook dinner now," or "I had a busy day at work." The key is to make it a habit.
Another thing that worked for me was practicing with language exchange apps. I found people who wanted to learn my native language, and we'd practice together. It was so helpful because I could speak with real people and get feedback in a relaxed way.
That's a great suggestion. You can also try recording yourself speaking. Pick a topic, talk about it for a minute or two, and then listen back. It helps you notice areas where you can improve, like pronunciation or grammar, and it builds your confidence hearing yourself speak in English.
I used to do that all the time. At first, I didn't like hearing my own voice, but it really helped me spot mistakes and track my progress. Plus, it made me more confident when speaking to others because I had already practiced so much on my own.
Whether you're talking to yourself, using apps, or recording your voice, the most important thing is to make speaking a regular part of your routine. Every little bit of practice adds up. Now let's talk about something that holds many learners back. Mistakes. If you're afraid of making mistakes, you're not alone. But here's the thing. Mistakes are not something to fear. In fact, they're one of the best ways to learn.
Oh, absolutely. I've made so many embarrassing mistakes while speaking English, but you know what? Most of the time, people didn't even notice or they just laughed along with me, and that made it less scary. Over time, I realized that making mistakes was actually helping me improve.
And that's such an important mindset to have. Mistakes are proof that you're trying, and they're a natural part of the learning process. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, try to see mistakes as opportunities to grow. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Then move on.
What helped me was keeping a little notebook where I'd write down mistakes I made during conversations. Later, I'd review them and figure out the correct way to say things. It turned mistakes into something positive, like a mini lesson just for me.
That's a great idea. Another way to stay motivated is to celebrate your progress, no matter how small. Maybe today you used a new phrase you learned, or you had a short conversation in English without freezing. Those are big wins, and it's important to acknowledge them.
Yes. And remember, language learning is a journey, not a race. Everyone improves at their own pace, so don't compare yourself to others. Focus on your own progress and enjoy the process. The more you practice, the more confident you'll feel.
Mistakes are your stepping stones to success, and staying motivated is about recognizing how far you've come and knowing that every effort you make brings you closer to fluency. Thanks so much for joining us today. Remember, the key to improving your English is to keep practicing and listening regularly. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will feel over time.
And if you have any questions, suggestions, or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, feel free to share them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
Don't forget to follow Quick English Fix for more relaxed and natural ways to learn English. Keep practicing, and we'll see you next time.